Welcome to Inmate Tea with AMP. I'm your host, April. Today we're joined by Toni Thomas, a fierce advocate fighting for the freedom of James Foote, who we have featured before on our podcast. He has already served 25 years of a 40-year sentence in Wisconsin. Toni has been uncovering the truth about James's case, exposing injustice, and confronting the hard realities of a system that disproportionately incarcerates African Americans. Wisconsin actually leading the nation in this crisis. In this conversation, we'll talk about James's case, the racism and broken sentencing laws that keep so many men behind bars, and what it's going to take to bring James home. Welcome, Toni, to the podcast.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Your platform is, it's doing wonders for people. It's letting people's stories get heard, their voices, so now it's making awareness. And awareness is one of the most important things. Awareness is needed. And sometimes people don't like to talk about incarceration. Some people don't want to address their family member being gone. But the hard reality is every family, someone is incarcerated. Unfortunately, we have cases where we have family members that are wrongfully convicted. And as you said, we're going to talk about Wisconsin.
Yes, let's talk about Wisconsin, because we got a problem going on in Wisconsin.
Yes, we do, because 42% of the state's prison population, despite being only 6% of Wisconsin residents, are African American. So think about that. The population is 6%. But you have 42% of the prison population being African Americans. So then let's talk about the truth in sentencing law, which they did change it, the CIS 1, which James was sentenced. As you know, he was sentenced for attempted first degree murder in an altercation where a man was brutally beat. And James was not there when it actually happened, but he did have an altercation with these individuals prior to that. He was able to escape, leave, and what happened after that, he could not tell what happened after that. So,
right.
With that being said, we're going to talk about all of that because there was two witnesses that called 911. Their story, what they told, how they told it, it was mind blowing to hear it. And, that's where we're going to bring that up. But we just want to talk about Wisconsin first, because there was a PBS that was Wisconsin Black and White. And in that segment where they were talking about criminal justice reform, they talked about Wisconsin. They talked about it used to be many of their cities were sundown cities. So that meant all the African Americans, they had to be in before sundown. It was crazy. And this was years ago, but still, when you have that mentality and that was built in people, a lot of times it's going to just go on for generations. That's still their mindset.
Absolutely. And it sounded like from James Foote's interview that he described this kind of mindset still taking place in where this altercation occurred.
Yes. And me, I don't live in Wisconsin. I live in Illinois, and it's 20 minutes from the Wisconsin border where I live. And growing up, we were always told, don't go to Wisconsin and get in trouble, because if you go to Wisconsin, you gonna be in some trouble. It's gonna be hard to get you out of.
Yeah.
That's kind of like what our parents would tell us.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, when you hear the story of James Foote, as you are already heard it, I'm just going to give an overview. There was a gentleman who was brutally beaten, and he ended up being in a vegetative state. And at that time, he was there. He left. The individuals that were still there, the two witnesses that woke up and was watching the altercation outside of their home, they're the ones that called 911. When the police arrived, they went outside. They told them, if you arrest these people you have right here, you'll have the perpetrators. Now, the perpetrators, they say, no, if you go get that, they didn't say black person, they said, we already know this discriminatory word in itself. So you go get that, who then in return, as they refer to him, but he's not, he's Mr. Foote, but in their eyes, you had already attempted to brutally beat him.
Yeah.
He was able to use this table leg to defend himself and get away.
Yep.
So on him getting away, now you want to put this on him. What transpired? He can't tell anyone what happened to Timothy. That's the guy who was brutally beaten. He can't say he didn't do it. And when you have a witness, older white couple, come outside and say he didn't do it, they're telling you who did it.
Yeah.
Then they're totally frustrated when they see the news the next day and see that a black man was arrested. They go to the police station, told anybody that would listen that those men did it. Anybody that would listen. But their words didn't matter. How is it they're calling 911? How do their words not matter? Because it was an African American male.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's sad because once there was a trial, Miss Moen, was she testified. And upon her testimony, the DA flipped it to make her testimony, I guess I wasn't there, so I can't say I couldn't hear it.
Yeah.
But I can only imagine, based upon that letter, that they tried to make her recollection not seem actual or factual, or she couldn't see. So upon that, she took it upon herself to write a letter to the judge. Not only did she write a letter, attached to the letter was a description of what she saw, very descriptive. Even described an individual who left the scene. The police pulled that person over. And upon pulling that person over, he matched the description of what she said. That individual even had blood on their clothes. So, but yet these individuals can tell the police the did.
Yeah.
So upon the trial, that was even a joke because he sent me newspaper articles. And in the newspaper article, it talked about the individuals testifying how they said they had either been drinking that night or doing drugs or doing both. So if you're drinking or you're doing drugs, how can you remember anything? Their stories conflicted. However, the one thing that remained the same was that James Foote beat this man with this table leg, brutally beat him.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I may have been drunk a time or two in my life. You know,
Yeah.
I don't think we can recall what happened,
Mm-hmm.
good, bad, or indifferent. I don't think a person can recall. It was even to the point an individual, he got on the stand and told them he had got high before he came to testify. They allowed that testimony.
Wow.
So they're going to allow this testimony versus the expert witness who got on the stand and said there was no blood and DNA on this table leg. What do you mean? They said it was bloody. So if it
Yeah.
was bloody, how is there no DNA on it or blood?
Yeah, and wood is a substance that's going to soak stuff like that up. So any kind of blood that gets on it would be down in the particles of the wood. It would hold it.
Exactly.
When we interviewed Mr. Foote regarding this issue, my major focus was, you say you got this table leg and he assaulted this man with this table leg. Okay. He was surrounded by a number of white men that were willing to do harm to him. He defended himself because he was a black man in a predominantly white area and he was with a white lady. And they took offense to that. And like you said, they used derogatory terms towards him that should not be classified in this day and age. Mr. Foote was seen by someone else, and these people come to court. Like you said, they wrote a letter stating, hey, we know that was not the perpetrator of the crime. If you come now, you'll get the people. And as you said, they tried to manipulate this lady's letter and manipulate this lady's testimony. This is a question of justice. This is a question of ethics on the court's behalf, on the judge's behalf, because the judge received these letters. And then the judge turned a blind eye to not only justice, but also racism that a race a race war that was playing out in his courtroom. He allowed a kangaroo court. He allowed a blatantly racist trial to take place. And Mr. Foote was prejudiced by this because anytime you bring race or color or creed into a courtroom, it has no place. You can't get a fair tribunal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's correct. And even, which I'm going to talk about, the letter, the letter itself and the description and everything she gave, that was exculpatory evidence. And it was never submitted to the jury. So the jury never knew. Like you said, I was thinking to myself, even if a jury of 12 people found him guilty, a judge, you're a judge. You had to have known that wasn't right. So even then, to sentence him to 40 years under the Truth in Sentencing law, which meant no possibility of parole, that in itself was racist. Because you can't say as a judge, if you have an expert witness, then you have witnesses that don't know anyone, they're only familiar with the person that live across the street, they tell you what happened. Then not only that, they submit a letter. And then even during this time of his trial, the assistant DA, he was involved in a barroom brawl. He was even arrested. And then in that situation, he pulled out his ID to let them know who he was and what the police should do. It was going to touch with the fact that the judge and how she proceeded and how the letter wasn't introduced. Then you had the state's attorney who he was involved in these altercations during the time that you're prosecuting James's case. That's not very ethical. So his first appeal, attorney for the state, they deemed it no merit. What do you mean it's no merit? You're saying that there's no cause, there's no justifiable, there's nothing that could be presented that would make a difference. There was a letter that wasn't submitted to the jury. That makes all the difference in the world. However, Wisconsin, once again, they're big on the no merit because, they have all these individuals that's incarcerated. Can you imagine their caseload?
Yeah,
Their
exactly.
caseload.
Yeah, I can.
And they're not looking at their case. They're looking at their caseload and probably like they're overwhelmed with work, but they're not looking at the aspect. This is somebody's life. This is their livelihood. This is a family. This is someone that's being taken away from a family. This is someone who means something to somebody. Just because they don't mean anything to you, they mean a whole lot to somebody else. And that's the problem. They characterize and think African American males are less than, but they're not less than at all. And I don't know if they're inferior because I can tell you about James Foote. He's very, very intelligent. Everything that I've done thus far, he has spearheaded. He has a letter for every.
Yes, we know James Foote is a very smart man. We were just overwhelmed with his knowledge, I know, when we interviewed him. So, yeah, that may have played into it.
And the thing is, ma'am, when you're put in a situation like we're put in, and you come in here, you take the time, you put in the energy, and you learn the law. You learn the ins and outs of your case. And not only your case, but others' case. And then you go into the courtroom and you show them the inconsistencies. You show them the discrepancies in your case. The judicial system, it rubs the people, the overseers, it rubs them wrong. Because they're like, how can this person that come from nothingness have the same or better understanding and comprehension of the law that I do, and I got a $200,000, $300,000 education. This man don't even have a proper high school education. But when you litigate the law from the standpoint of the only thing you have to lose is your life, because your life is on the line, when it's your breath, this fight is every breath that you got to get your life back. It changes things. It changes the narrative. And that's what Mr. Foote has done. Mr. Foote took the time to study the law in depth. He's done the same as I have done. We study the law. When we got on this podcast, we really vibed because this man understood the law. I understood the law, and we were able, like you were talking about a while ago, exculpatory evidence that was denied. Most people don't even know what exculpatory evidence is. Most people don't even understand due process. Most people don't even understand the Sixth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Fourth Amendment. They don't understand these things. And Mr. Foote he's learned his case. He's ate his case. He's slept with his case. He's breathed his case. Everything he's done is his case. And when you put it on and you wear it like clothing every day, 24/7, 365 days a year, people really don't like that, because you can tell them something about your case that they know is wrong and they don't want to see it. They turn a blind eye to it. And that's where Lady Justice, that where they say she's got on a blindfold. No, she's turned her head. And that's what Lady Justice has done to Mr. Foote in Wisconsin. And there's no telling how many more. And like you said, if you open that door and allow these people to start flowing in, showing these inconsistencies, showing the evidence that they have, Wisconsin's court system will be so backed up and so clogged up that their clerks, their judges will not be able to breathe for a long time. That's why they're turning a blind eye, ma'am. That's why people such as yourself and doing what you're doing, bringing awareness to the racism, the inconsistencies, the injustice that's being served upon people in Wisconsin. That's why you're so important in Wisconsin and in every other state.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, this subject is taboo, ma'am. This subject is taboo. People don't want to talk about this.
They don't want to talk about it until they're living it. They don't understand it until they're the ones that have been done wrong by the justice system. They're not going to get it. And that's why we started this podcast really, is to bring these issues to the forefront, because there's so much that people don't know that goes on, and they're not going to know about it until they see our episodes, they see our show, they hear the stories from people that have lived it themselves, or they actually fall victim to the justice system.
And with that being said, in several points, when people hear, for instance, you had many people that went to the trial. You had all these witnesses testifying. And if you just listen to the testimony versus the actual real evidence, then you would know that this makes no sense. This is absolutely incorrect. But how did 12 find him guilty based on that? Because they turn a blind eye to, as he said, the truth. And then you have people, they don't quite understand the law. They don't get the law. So they're listening, and since they said he was guilty and these people got on the stand and said A, B, C, D, then A, B, C, D was true. Absolutely not. If you there, you heard it. If you hear somebody say the forensics said the DNA was not, and blood was not on the alleged weapon, come on now, that should have ended it right there.
Yeah.
But it didn't. It ended up in a guilty conviction. So now, we're 25 years later, and I'm looking at this like, are you serious? I've reached out to legislators. I've hand delivered a packet to one. I've reached out to the Wisconsin Black Caucus, and the least they could do is respond. And it's not even responding to me, because I'm not your resident. You should be concerned, because your number one fight in Wisconsin should be that high number of incarcerated African Americans.
Absolutely.
That should be first and foremost. I understand education, and even in the letter that I sent them, you have children that's not being educated properly. They have all these issues, but how many of them have an absent parent that's incarcerated? Because if that parent was at home,
that's right,
there will be a totally different child. The things that the struggles that they're having, they're going to have a parent there that's going to help see them through and guide them through that. But you're removing that from the home. So now you're getting a lot of lost children. If you bring it to the top and work your way down, then you might work it out. I spoke several weeks ago at a wrongful conviction event in Milwaukee. And that was another individual that had been wrongfully convicted. His name Michael Nash. So I was there, I spoke, and the thing is, you hear the story over and over, and the different stories that you hear, it just makes you go, wow. And for the legislators, you don't have to respond to me, because I'm not in your district. I'm not of your legislative body. However, you owe it to those in Wisconsin. You owe it to those that's convicted. Why not have a conversation with Mr. Foote? Why not? You're the Black Caucus. You should be concerned. You should be of worry and of fear because you have Black children yourself. And just because you are who you are, don't mean that they're not going to face what somebody else is facing. And I guarantee if one of them face it, then you're going to want everybody to get on board. Well, you need to get on board now.
In the United States, you have a problem, and this is a major problem. It's a problem of suppress the voice of those that need to be heard. Those are the people that they want to be heard. But those people, as James Foote, that needs to tell their story. Those people that want to save the youth from going down the same road that our ancestors have gone down, whether it's Native American, whether it's Black American, whether it's no matter your nationality, each one of us, we have an obligation. And those of us that obligated to our children, to saving our children, those are the voices that squash down. Those are the voices that nobody wants to hear. If you put a father back in the home and a man takes up his role, because it is the responsibility of a man to take up his role as a man in a home, and he takes that role up and raises his child and helps the mother of the child to raise their children up, that is beautiful. But we all have a misconception of who we actually are because our ancestors, our mothers, was at home with us while our fathers was in the penitentiary. And the penitentiary has just become this because they designed these stockades by the military. And the stockades become prisons. And they were designed to lock the Native Americans up, to lock the blacks up, to lock the Irish people up. To lock the people they considered vagabonds of the United States, to put them in there and to hold them in these places. And they wanted to separate it because they could no longer enslave you. They could no longer put you in the field, so they had to make money off of it. So this is a big money business. And that's why they don't want nobody to reform their child, because their youth is the next people that's going to keep this money flowing into their pockets. And that's why they don't want to do what you just spoke about, man. And it takes people like us to make everybody else aware of what's going on.
The prison population is a form of slavery. And what he was speaking on, there's called the school to prison pipeline. And
absolutely.
they go into the schools. They go into schools when children, I think, is it the first or second grade, and they do studies to determine how many prisons they're going to need when those children are of age. So if that's not telling us something.
Absolutely. They're already preparing. They're like, okay, how many of these are we going to have to, keep us up, because the prison is a big business.
And that's unfortunate, It's just so much to it. And as I said, his case has opened my eyes to some things that made me go, wow.
Yeah.
Believe
me, we're like that every day.
So
seeing these cases like James Foote's, and it's just unreal. That's why we gotta get these stories out and bring awareness and get something done. Something has got to change, and people have got to be held accountable for these things.
Yes, there should be accountability for the DAs, for the judges, for anyone that can turn a blind eye. There should be accountability.
Yes.
And I am, little by little, I'm making headway. I'm telling his story. I'm reaching out to individuals. Like I said, James, he does all the work for you. He just needed a voice.
Yes.
So he gives me a list on top of list of people to contact. And upon contacting a young lady, she's with the Milwaukee NAACP. She was like, I know James. I know this story. She's a psychologist. And she was like, she's talked to him. And upon me going to that event in Milwaukee, she showed up at the event, and we have flyers with his information on it. She was like, this is who I'm here about. And with that being said, she's come up with some ideas and some things that she wants to do and to help them get involved with this fight, which, it would be amazing.
Yes.
As these things start coming together, it's amazing. And my thing is, you have had some attorneys. One said they'll take the case, $15,000. $7,500 down. Let's just talk about that.
Oh
Somebody
gosh.
been in somebody been in prison for 25 years, as James would say, a quarter of a century. So do they just have $15,000 laying around?
No.
So it's like what you're saying is you want to burden someone else, and a lot of times people they come from low income families, and sometimes that's just a hard price to come up with, and actually there are several others, and I told them we're claiming favor, and that hopefully by the end of the week, that favor is going to turn into representation.
Yes.
And I've reached out to the DA's office. I know they're sick of me as well. I've requested a meeting with the current DA. You're not the same man. You shouldn't be held accountable for what the last DA and what his staff did. So let's have a conversation about it. Like,
Yeah.
so I'm waiting for my date and time. So they responded saying, that they had forwarded to him so he could specifically give me a date and time in which, to talk.
Yeah.
So, that can take a little longer.
You've made some great headway with this. I'm excited to hear what comes next for James Foote. And one thing you touched on was attorneys, and I always like to remind our viewers that you've got to be careful with these attorneys, because if there's one thing we know from this podcast is that there's a lot of attorneys that prey on the incarcerated for the money, and then they run off with it and do nothing, because what is someone that's in prison going to do? They can't do anything. So got to be mindful of that as well and careful of that. And I'm just thankful that James Foote has you advocating for him, looking out for him through these obstacles. That's major. That is major.
Well, thank you, because as you were saying about these attorneys, hands down, he had ineffective counsel.
Yes.
And of course, at that time, he didn't know. He was 30, he didn't have this type of experience. So with that being said, accountability has to go across the board to everyone involved. Just like there's these laws, they should also implement, okay, these things cannot be overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a letter and then the exculpatory evidence that's attached to the letter, and it's submitted and it's not given to the jury, it's not being addressed, that's not an accident. That's not a boo-boo.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Mm-hmm. So
And
Toni, what's coming up next? Like, what do you have planned next to help kind of like get the word out there? I know you're here on the podcast, and of course we're going to like put this out there as far as we can, and I hope our viewers share the heck out of this video for James Foote. But what do you have next in the pipeline?
What I have next is October 2nd. I will be in Cleveland, Ohio at EPIC's 5th annual Wrongful Conviction Day Awareness Rally. So I'm really excited about going east in the Midwest to tell the story, because I think awareness and making people aware, that's the biggest part. So now I'm over here. We're just not in Illinois and Wisconsin talking about this. Now we're getting some talk in, Ohio. Who hopefully we're going to have so many people there or that's watching that, and all we need is just those two people, just two, to say, you know what, that's not right.
Yeah,
we're going to get on board. And what you guys can do for me, another thing that we're getting ready to start doing is just having videos. It can be a 5-second, 10-second video saying justice for James Foote, 25 years too long, or those things.
Oh, we will definitely get on that.
Yes. Anything that's iterating something to his conviction, something to say, okay, wrongfully incarcerated,
Yeah.
James has been wrongfully incarcerated. It's time to bring him home. Anything of that nature. It can be, creative, however you see fit, whatever you think, your wording, your ideas. We just want it all so we want to share that as well. Anyone that you know.
Video.
And then I can give you my email address, and I want to make a whole file of it. And then send that to the DA as well. All over the board, all across. We want everybody to be talking about justice for James.
Thank you to our viewers for joining us for this important episode of Inmate Tea with AMP. Toni's story reminds us that behind every statistic is a name, a family, and a fight for justice. James's journey is not over, And voices like Toni's are what keep hope alive and pressure on a system that too often fails the very people it should serve. Let's carry this conversation forward, keep shining a light on injustice, and fight for those who deserve a second chance. If this conversation moved you, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so we can keep bringing you powerful stories like this and continue to amplify voices that deserve to be heard. Until next time, this is Inmate Tea with AMP.